Hello everyone. Today we are creating a texture bombing setup inside Houdini Solaris using Material X. So texture bombing, also sometimes known as no tiling textures, is a method of tiling the same texture while avoiding any obviously noticeable repetition. So that's done by either introducing some random rotations, random scales, some distortion using some noises. So let's get right into it. So I'm here in the Solaris context, and the first thing we need is some geometry. So I'll use the SOP create node. Let me put that down, SOP create, and dive inside. I'll create a grid node here, and I'll give it some UVs using the UV texture node. And I'll finish this off by putting down the output node. Okay, let's go back. Next, let's create a material library inside which we can create our materials. So the material library node, I'll connect these two together and put the display flag on the material library. I'll also turn on assign to geometry and give it a path to our geometry. So I can do that by going to the scene graph path and dragging our mesh over to the geometry path field. And that way, any material we create inside the material library will get assigned to our mesh. So let's dive inside the library and create the Material X builder node. And within this node, we'll create our texture bombing setup. So let's dive in. And the first thing we need is we need access to our UVs. We can do that by using the texture coordinates node. So I'm going to put that down next. Texture coordinates. And let's visualize this by connecting it to the color input of the standard surface. Let me expand this base group, and I'll connect the texture coordinate output straight into the base color. So that's what our UVs look like. I need to create some tiling on these UVs, which I can do by multiplying this texture coordinate node by some number. And that number will represent the number of tiles we have. So let's take a multiply node, connect it in. And as I increase the value of the second input on the multiply, it'll create our tiles. But we can't see anything right now because we don't have an image to tile. So next, let's bring an image in. I'll use the image node. And let's use an image path here. I'll connect the output of the multiply to the texture coordinates of the image, and the output of the image goes into base color of the surface. And here we can see how our tiling is working. So as I go back to the multiply node and change this input 2 value, it'll change the tiling for our texture. Okay, so I'm going to leave this at 4x4 for now, and I'll rename this to UV tiling so we know exactly what this node is doing. And next, let's start creating some randomization. So the first thing I like to do for randomization is introduce a noise that will help us shift the image within every tile with some random offset. So let me make some space here, and I'll use the cell noise 2D for that. So let's bring in the cell noise 2D, connect it together. However, the output of this is a float, so it can't be used directly as the texture coordinate. So I'll add this back to our tiled UVs using the add node. And you'll see how it has shifted the image with a different amount for every tile that we have. So that creates a nice sort of randomization. Next, let's create some random rotations for every tile. So we want that the image within every tile to be rotated by a random value. So again, let me make some space here, and we'll utilize the rotate 2D node for this. So search for the rotate 2D, input it here, and let's just give this some amount here to check if the rotation is working. And yes, the rotations are working, but we have an issue. The rotations are not working for the individual tiles, and by that I mean I would like the image within every tile to rotate from the center of the tile itself. So I would like this tile to have its pivotal rotation in the middle, this tile have the rotational pivot to its center, and so on. And to achieve that, we need to put in a couple of nodes here. So we would need the modulo node, add that in between the rotate and the add node. So this way we have a separate pivot for every tile, but it's still not in the center. And that's because it's at the corner of every tile and it needs to be offsetted to the middle. To do that, we need to use the subtract node, and we'll subtract a value of 0.5 from both the U and the V. And this way, once I go back to my rotation amount and change it, you'll see that the rotation's happening from the center of every tile. But now that we've added this offset with the subtract node, we need to reverse that. So I'll use the add node, and I'll add the same amount, 0.5, with this add node. And that essentially sort of gets rid of the offset that we've created. Okay, great. Our rotation still works, but next we need to make sure that the rotation is random for every tile. And that's where this cell noise comes in. Now the cell noise is creating a different value for every cell. So we can utilize that and use that value for the amount for rotation. But the value is quite small. I think it's between 0 and 1. So we need to remap that value range to a different range. So for that, I'm going to use the range node. And we'll plug it in here. And we'll say it'll go from the out low is going to be, let's say, -45 to an out high of 45. So you see that gives us some sort of random rotations. And you can choose any value you want. Here we can go from like -90 almost to +90 here. And that just helps us randomize everything. Okay, so in a similar way that we've done random rotations, we can also do random scale. And all we would need to do is multiply the RUVs after the rotate node with some sort of a random value. So I'm going to put down the multiply node first. And this goes in between the rotate and the add. And we'll duplicate this range node and connect it to the second input of the multiply. Of course, our values are kind of strange right now. So we'll go from an out low of 1 to an out high of 2. Maybe let's just change the values a little bit further. All right, let's say about there. So now we have random rotations and random scale taken care of. Next, let's add some distortion. So right now the edges between these tiles are quite straight, and it would be really nice if they were distorted. That would really help this all these tiles sort of integrate a little bit better, and it'll help us notice these straight edges a little less. So I'm going to utilize a noise for that. And this time, instead of a cell noise, we'll use a unified noise. So I'll use the unified noise 2D. And I need to add this before the cell noise. So again, let me make some space here. I'll use the add node. And on this branch before the cell noise, we'll add our unified noise. Okay. On the unified noise, let's just increase some frequency, say about there. And you can see how it's distorted our edges. And now we don't have so many of the straight lines. We still have a few which is within every tile. But between our UV tiles, we've removed the straight lines and we've added some distortion. What I'll do is I'll also add a multiply node after the unified noise, and this will just help us control the strength of this noise. So if I put this multiply down to 0, then you see it all goes back to straight lines. If I increase this value, and you'll see the distortion starts to come in. Well, one of the things that's happening here is that our UV tiles are getting shifted. And if you just kind of pay close attention, our tile starts up here, and then slowly all of them start to deviate down to the bottom right. Well, that's happening because this noise is not zero-centered. It goes from a range of 0 to 1. So to make it zero-centered, we will subtract. We'll use the subtract node to subtract a value of 0.5. So we'll put the input 2 to 0.5. And now if I go back to the multiply, which I should rename to noise strength, and we up the strength a little bit, you'll see that the distortion is happening, but the tiles stay put. The tiles are not getting shifted. Okay, so we have our distortion in, we have random rotation, we have some random scale, we have UV tiling working, and that's our texture bombing setup. Thanks for watching.